Environment in any locale in any part of the world is a reflection of the people who live there. Change the people through education, for example, and the environment will change to reflect the slightest nuance of difference. Now, for the purpose of this message, I want you to consider your own environment from your earliest memories right up to the present time. By environment, I mean the houses you lived in as a child, the neighborhoods, the family itself. What had been the educational backgrounds of your parents and your neighbors? And how about your environment today? Would you say your environment reflects lower, middle, upper middle, or high-income people? And ask yourself if the environment in which you now live is the environment you will find to be satisfactory for the remainder of your life. You see, environment is a two-edged kind of thing. While environment is a reflection of the people, our attitudes are conditioned and reinforced by the environment. Let's look at a couple of examples. A business executive leaves his home to go to the office. It's early summer and a beautiful morning. He drives his car, which receives regular washing, out of the garage, sweeps down the drive to the street, and turns toward town. On both sides of the street, fine homes can be seen, their lawns and landscaping well cared for, their paint bright, windows sparkling clean in the early morning light. Our business executive drinks in the sight. Beautiful, he says to himself. What a lovely morning. All is well. His world is in order. His fine car makes hardly a sound as it moves along the clean, orderly street. The neighborhood reflects this executive, and the people in his same income education group who own the homes up and down the street. It was as natural for our business executive and his wife to choose the home in which they live and pay the price for it as it is for any family anywhere. They think and live in those terms. The neighborhood reflects them, their education and aspirations, their level of accomplishment, and costs them no more from a percentage of income standpoint than do the homes and neighborhoods of anyone else in the country. And this is important. Once acquired, that home and neighborhood and society represent constant reinforcement of themselves, the way they think and behave, and their expectations of continued accomplishment. They may move further upward or sideways, but the chance of their moving backwards, or let's say downwards, are so small as to be negligible. Put as simply as possible, they are where they think they ought to be. His and her work represent the work they think they should be doing, and they do it well. At work, this executive's office is once again a reflection of him and what he does, as is his work, as are the people with whom he communicates during the day and joins for lunch. And when our executive drives home in the early evening, he is bathed once more in the ambiance of his place in the scheme of things. His world is a mirror of his thoughts. He is what he thinks about. In The Strangest Secret, the message I wrote and recorded nearly 30 years ago, I pointed out that as a young boy of 12, I began looking for the so-called secret that successful people had and that unsuccessful people did not have. After asking dozens of grown-ups a few questions, I realized I was working in the wrong neighborhood. I was also living in the wrong neighborhood. If they knew the secret, I realized, they wouldn't be available for my questions. Instead, they'd be busy being successful. They certainly wouldn't be living in my part of town. So, with a newly issued library card in hand, I began haunting the Long Beach Public Library. I remember standing and looking at the woman seated at the desk. She would stamp books out, occasionally smile at someone, and make suggestions as to where the books they were looking for could be found. Well, I wanted to just walk up to her and ask, "Would you please tell me where I can find the book with the secret of success?" But it was clear to me that she wouldn't know that, so I started reading those books that seemed to be likely candidates. Soon I found myself sidetracked into the world of the most exciting fiction, the Hardy Boys, the great mind-expanding stories of Edgar Rice Burroughs and Zane Grey. I couldn't get enough of them, and took them from the library in armloads and assiduously brought them back, spent on time, so that I could get more. What a wonderful place that library was, and in those wonderful books, I learned the importance of honesty and courage and of believing in what's right and being willing to fight for it. Books are filled with ideas, and ideas spur us into action. And it was in a book that I finally found the secret of success I started looking for as that boy of 12. I was 29 when I found it, but I'd been on the trail for many years. Just as a gold miner will find indications that he's looking in the right places, everything I had read up to the moment of discovery had, in a way, prepared me for the truth of what I was about to see. And one day, poking about in what was then Croc and Brentano's bookstore on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, I picked up the book, Think and Grow Rich, by Napoleon Hill. The title made sense to me. If one was to grow rich, certainly it would come about as a result of thinking. I bought the book, took it home. The following weekend, I came to the secret, spelled out and needing no further description or definition. I read the words, "We become what we think about." I found much of the book archaic, but that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that small book was the one I'd started looking for 17 years before. That was the book that held the secret of success. We become what we think about. Just 6 words. Now, there are more than 600,000 words in the English language, but those were the 6 I wanted to see in that particular order, and it was at that moment that I had the answer I needed. It went like this: I can determine what I think about. Therefore, I can determine what I become and what I have. Everything fell into place then, of course. People who thought about becoming lawyers became lawyers. When I was a boy in Long Beach during the Great Depression, what did the people in our neighborhood think about? To begin with, they didn't think about very much. They thought about getting by on minimums as best they could. They thought about their government relief check. They thought about shopping at a nearby store, going to the movie at the Bijou occasionally, maybe getting an occasional odd job or even a steady job. And that was the end of it. Their lives had been mirrors of their thoughts. They had quit learning too soon. They were using the astonishing human brain and body for mundane, ordinary tasks, or for doing nothing with them at all. They were looking for ways to save money instead of earning money. We didn't ride, we walked, except for an occasional bus or streetcar ride, which I never failed to enjoy. When my trousers developed a hole in them, we didn't think of ways in which we might buy a new pair of trousers. We thought in terms of mending the hole, and the pants became what we thought about, mended pants. So did socks. The other day I received a letter from a Rabbi Stephen Rubin of Tarzana, California. With his letter were 2 talks he had delivered to his congregation. One of them was titled, "You Already Know the Secret." In his letter to me, he says, "The talk entitled You Already Know the Secret was in many ways inspired by your own messages, and I'm sure you'll recognize many of the quotations that you've used in the past." And in his talk to his congregation, the rabbi says, "Yes, I did discover the secret of success, and it led me to explore the thoughts of authors, poets, philosophers, prophets, sages, and a host of teachers of our time and ages past to discover what each of them believed about the secret of success." What I discovered, he goes on to say, was astounding. I found an abundance of wisdom as ancient as our 3,000-year-old Torah and as modern as 20th century science. To my amazement, I realized that from the Bible to the Greek philosophers, from the wisdom of Rome through medieval studies of the human condition, from Shakespeare to Milton to Emerson to the rabbis of the Talmud, each and every one had discovered an answer to the secret of success. But the most astounding discovery of all was the realization that all of them, in their own languages and in their own way, discovered the exact same secret. The universal key to success, simply put, is this: as you think, so shall you become. As you think, so shall you become. So we have the secret. We become what we think about. Now what? Well, here's the best part of all. Here's where your own original DNA helix comes into the picture. You're an original whether you think you are or not. You're an original whether you like the idea or not. You have what we might call a genetic profile that is different from any other genetic profile that ever or ever will appear in the universe, because no one else in the universe has had your particular set of ancestors or put their incredibly complicated genes together as you have. You might think of yourself as a painting, framed and hanging on the wall at birth. Each of your parents, and each of your parents' thousands of ancestors, has placed a daub of paint on that painting. At birth, your environment and your family, later your friends and acquaintances, your school, all began adding to your picture as you started adding to it yourself. Now put that accumulated painting into your mind at your present stage, and all of it determines the way you habitually think. Now, what you can do and what you want are different from what I can do and what I want, and different in some ways from what everyone else on the planet can do and wants. That's what keeps everybody from wanting and doing the same thing. Not long ago, my wife Diana and I were in Central Florida and visited SeaWorld. There we took in the wonderful show featuring the killer whales and their trainers. It was terrific. We enjoyed it thoroughly. We watched the young men and women whose work is to work with the killer whales. They ride them and pet and feed them. They hang onto a harness attached to the whales while the whales dive 35 feet to the bottom of their tank and then throw themselves high in the air, tossing their riders even higher as they do so. Now, do you want to spend your days working with killer whales? These people do, and there were others there who specialized in water skiing, some driving the boats, others doing the skiing. We also visited a man who works in the advertising department of a company that makes the speedboats that pull the water skiers. The wonderful thing about all of this is that we all want to do different things, and those of us who are in the same professions want to do our work in those professions differently from the way others do it. Now, what do you want to do? Okay, that's what you'll become. You see, in preparing for what we do and in doing it, we become certain kinds of people who will just naturally live a certain way and have certain things. Each of us is responsible for what he or she becomes by virtue of the choices we make from the great spectrum of options with which we're confronted and for which our education prepares us. Our rich genetic inheritance gives each of us a wide range of options, and our free society gives us free choice from that range of options. The better the environment in which we're raised, or the better our education as young people and the better the education of our parents, the greater the spectrum of options we'll be exposed to during our formative years. Each new idea to which we're exposed raises a curtain on a new window of possible interest and opportunity. A child raised in a small village deep in the hills of an isolated area of the country may seem to be at the minimum range of options exposure, but television and radio bring to him or her the whole world beyond that small valley, and there are few places in that world to which he or she cannot aspire, and in which that youngster will not be welcome if he or she can qualify for them. Now, when we come to fully understand that we become what we think about, we begin to see how our goals can lead us to whatever requirements are necessary. The youngster who dreams of becoming, let's say a physician, knows that college and medical school are necessary. We become what we think about, all right, all the years of our lives, and we can easily tell the extent and quality of a person's thinking by simply observing the extent and quality of that person's life. As I put this message together, it's been 30 years since I wrote and recorded The Strangest Secret, the recording that started our industry and earned me a gold record for sales of more than 1 million copies, the first record of its kind ever to do so. Well, I've had 30 years to watch The Strangest Secret work in my life and the lives of others. It's fair to ask if anything has happened during those 30 years to alter my thinking on the subject. They've been 30 years of war and peace, 30 years that have seen technology and electronics carry us to heights never dreamed of, 30 years that saw the birth of space travel and our landing on the moon, of economic boom and recession, and the birth of a new age for mankind, the information age, as the post-industrial world emerges into the sunlight of a new and cleaner age. During those 3 decades, we've received thousands of letters from customers and radio listeners telling us how the so-called secret has worked for them. I can travel nowhere in the country without someone telling me how the Strangest Secret, or our Lead the Field program, which was our first full-scale program, has helped them in their lives. I went into a bank in Florida not long ago to cash a check. I'd never been in the bank before, and so I was ready to haul out all sorts of identification, when the manager told me that I'd been responsible for his move to Florida from the Northeast, and how much our messages have meant to him over the years. In all that time, I have never heard from anyone saying, "I gave the idea my best shot, and it didn't work." Of course it works. It can't do anything else. Our minds are the gyro compasses of our lives. We can only go where they direct us, and we're in charge of our minds. True, the mind has depths and realms of which we know little or nothing at all. It has a way of contacting sources and racial memory that often surprises and delights us. But we're the masters of our minds, and that such innocence should be in command of so powerful an agency is an interesting subject in itself. Of course, despite its potential, it can only move as we direct it. There's hardware on the moon that we transported there, and we have spaceships traveling millions of miles into interstellar space. It all came from ideas spawned from the minds of men and women, and as researchers have recently told us, the human mind is, for all practical purposes, infinite. As infinite as space itself. And so is there any room left to doubt that we become what we think about, and that we can, if we wish, control our minds, and by so doing, control the direction and the result of our lives? Of course we can, and do, every day of our lives, whether we're conscious of the fact or not, whether we're lifting little lunch buckets or doing bigger jobs. Just as the prisons are filled with people who thought in terms of breaking the law, every human life is the story of what goes on in that person's mind. Do our lives reflect a fair and honest use of the miraculous equipment with which we were born? How much of our latent potential do we customarily use? Are we using enough? It's there for our private use, and it's the same equipment Einstein used to give us the special theory of relativity and the formula E equals mc squared that put into the hands of human beings the secret of the stars. Now, you may not be a whiz at quantum physics, I'm not either, but you have strengths, then, in areas in which Dr. Einstein was weak. What's your bag, as we used to say? Where's your main interest? And what do you want to accomplish during your stay on this beautiful blue island in space? Perhaps you're one of the people who plan to leave it and work in space stations. One of our problems, especially here in the United States, is that it's so easy to get by. We hear people say, "Why should I knock myself out?" And as they part, they call to each other, "Don't work too hard." Fine. Nothing wrong with that kind of thinking if it's in concert with your goals and your want list. We'll get into these subjects on another side, but remember that it all ties together. Don't work too hard at what? What is meant by the expression, "take it easy"? During the 60s, someone came up with an addition to that well-worn cliché. We heard, "Take it easy, but take it." It was part of the what's in it for me times, and there was all that talk about doing your own thing. But I never found out what such a person's own thing was. What doing your thing usually turned out to be was nothing at all, and plucking ineffectually at a used guitar. During that guitar time, I used to wonder how many people actually learned to play it well. Not very many, I understand, and today the attics and garages of America are full of old guitars that were the symbol of doing one's own thing. Well, I'm all for doing one's own thing. That's what I'm doing at this very moment. But find out what your thing is, and when you do, then do your thing surpassingly well as you can do it. And if you keep at it for a sufficient amount of time, and that's important too and quite necessary, you'll wake up one fine morning, as someone has written, to find yourself one of the competent people of your generation, and what wonderful experiences you'll have when that time comes. One time my wife Diane and I were traveling on the famous Blue Train from Johannesburg to Cape Town, South Africa. We were sitting in our compartment talking and enjoying the passing scenery when my own radio program came on over the train's music system. The train's radio system, it turned out, was tuned to South Africa's Springbok Radio, which has carried my daily programs for about 20 years. To hear it at that time and place was reward indeed. Later in the club car, the bartender asked for my autograph and said that next to Elton John, I was his favorite. High praise indeed. He also had Elton John's autograph. When I discovered the strangest secret for myself, when I learned that I had only to seriously set goals and then begin moving toward them in order to accomplish whatever I wanted to accomplish in life, and that by so doing I was marshaling forces, invisible forces, if you will, that were astonishing in their efficiency, I made the move to the driver's seat in my life. It was an experience I'll never forget, and there were times when it used to puzzle me. I found myself asking how people who were patently unqualified for certain kinds of success might use the formula, and, upon investigation, found that the system has a built-in self-regulator. People do not seriously make up their minds to achieve those things and levels of accomplishment that are beyond their imaginations or capacities. Our wants, our serious wants, are regulated by our genetic capacity. Once achieved, once we've grown to fit the new plateau of achievement, we can then set higher goals and grow as persons to fit them. When we set such goals and put the formula to work, we immediately begin to become the person to whom such achievement would be a normal result of his or her activities. We'll go into this on the message on goal setting, but for now, remember that everybody seems to want something different. If you'll begin to observe people, you'll quickly see this phenomenon at work. Our goals tend to be in keeping with our true potential as well as our true desires. One man's wealth might be another's poverty, and what most people do for a living would not necessarily work for us, no matter how varied their jobs might be. It's really amazing how people fit into the categories we need for a viable society, from picking up trash and repairing streets and highways, driving airport limousines, working at airport coffee shops, hotel clerks, bellmen, cooks, waiters, police officers, radio announcers, television news people, actors, actresses, writers, producers, camera people, makeup people, grips, scenery designers, stray dog catchers, politicians and businessmen and women. To fit every possible human need and want, there are people quite happy to work at all those callings. They constitute what William James called the great flywheel of society. They're not only apparently quite content in those jobs, but willing to do them in the most out-of-the-way and unlikely places. It's really wonderful. But for each of them, to understand that we become what we think about can make an enormous difference in his or her life. And about that apparently quite content business, surveys indicate that as high as 65% of those who seem perfectly happy where they are would gladly move into more congenial and interesting work if, 1, they knew what it was they really wanted to do, and 2, if they thought they could successfully make the leap to such work. They tend to make do with the work they're in, and they're suspicious of any radical change that might plunge them into the abyss. Eric Hoffer pointed out in his marvelous little book, The True Believer, that there is a conservatism of the poor that's as rigid as the conservatism of the very rich. Meager as their lives are, they've learned to cope and survive on that level, and fear any change that might, they believe, be for the worse. So each of us sits at the controls of this enormous source of potential power, the human mind. On every side of us we can see what the minds of human beings can and have brought about in the world. Do we ask the question, what shall my contribution to all of this be? We need to keep in mind that just as the computer age gave us the word gigo, which translates into garbage in, garbage out, and tells us that the computer can only provide answers based on the kind of information we put into it, the same is true of this mind of ours. The other evening on public television, I saw for the first time the classic motion picture The Corn is Green, starring Katharine Hepburn as an English schoolmistress. The story is about a boy she finds in the Welsh coal mining community who takes the idea of education seriously. She nourishes his mind and spirit, and through her efforts helps him gain acceptance to Trinity College in world-famous Oxford University. In the motion picture, Katharine Hepburn says to the lad, "We all walk in the dark, and each of us must learn to turn on his own light." Of course we all walk in the dark. We're surrounded by mystery of a vast and unyielding magnificence. We stand on a dark night and look at the sky and the black depth of space with the millions of gleaming stars and the great dim wash of galaxies and shiver at the thought of our isolation and microscopic insignificance. There's so much we don't know, but we're learning. Yes, we walk in the dark, and will continue to do so for perhaps ages to come, and it's up to each of us to turn on his or her own light, to make his or her own way through the labyrinth of his or her own life. And if during that brief time we can add to the quality of that life and perhaps the lives of others, so much the better. And if we can love that life and the opportunity it affords us and give it the best that's in us for our brief sojourn here, then so much the better. We've turned on other lights. Thinking is the highest function of the human being. We're apparently the only creatures on planet Earth that can do that. That's our bag, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to think and solve problems. Remember when Mr. Watson of IBM had those little signs everywhere? One-word signs, just the word think. People used to make fun of that and put up signs with the word think misspelled. Take a look at the numbers on IBM today. Last time I looked, sales were reaching about 50 billion. Apparently a lot of people there took Mr. Watson's signs seriously. Thinking made all that possible. When you sit down and begin to think about a problem, you're engaging in the highest function of which any known living creature on the planet can perform. It's better than a triple-back somersault off the 6-meter board or trying to juggle 2 skunks and a bobcat. There's nothing you can do that's better for you to do than think. And yet it's the very last thing the majority of people will do. They'll ask their neighbors for advice, the people at work, the people sitting next to them on the subway or downtown bus or airplane. They'll even seek the counsel of their brothers-in-law before they will, quietly and alone, with pad and pencil, sit down and think about the problem that confronts them. I keep yellow legal pads around. I have a stack of them in my study, in my office, and in my briefcase. At the top of the page, write out the problem. The problem represents a trip you want to take. You want to get from where you are to the solution of that problem. So first, define the problem. A problem defined is half solved, as the saying has it, and it's true. Just seeing the problem spelled out helps to clarify it. Then we can start writing down possible solutions, and we can put down the pencil or pen and stare off into space as we turn the problem over and over in our mind like a chicken on a rotisserie, exposing every part of it to the radiance of our mind and the great powers to which the mind has recourse. Over and over we turn it, and we write down every possible thing we can think of that might lead to its solution, no matter how silly it might appear to others who will never see it. We keep this to ourselves, and we keep looking for answers. Then we ask, are there any books on this subject that might be helpful? Surely other people have had this same problem before. Let's see what they did about it. Are there experts we can contact on the subject? Now that's the sort of counsel we want. And if we think it's a good idea, let's talk it over with someone whose ideas we respect and upon whom we can count for serious help on the matter. And as we crank our rotisserie and consider the problem, we keep our attitude positive about it. We look upon the problem as a challenge, something to solve and overcome, not as something that will continue to block us. We know there's an answer. What is it? And one fine day, as we're taking a stroll or a shower or driving the car or even sleeping, almost always at our leisure, the solution to our problem will appear. It will appear with all the lovely clarity of an elk on the far bank of a mountain lake. And when it does, we write it down, and we continue to write about it. And when it's as clearly defined as we can make it, we try to push farther and see if there are more good solutions lurking just behind it. Sometimes the first answer is a kind of teaser, and there are better ideas further on, so let's push on, writing down whatever else comes to us, and we've solved the problem, for the time being. When we've done that, we've accomplished what we were designed to do. We have solved a problem. Of course, there are two kinds of problems. There are convergent problems, and there are divergent problems. Convergent problems are those which, as the word implies, converge. That is, two or more factors can be brought together from different directions which, when brought to an intersection, solve the problem. Building a house is such a problem, and when all the parts are in place, the house is complete. The problem has been successfully solved. All physical problems, or perhaps I should say mechanical problems, are ultimately convergent. Divergent problems are those which deal with other human beings. How to educate people is a divergent problem because what will work for one person won't necessarily work for another. Living successfully in marriage is a divergent problem, and one that must be solved on a daily basis. Each day we begin all over again and solve the problems of that day. And even mechanical problems, when solved, are very temporary because of the factor of change. The changes in transportation are a good example, or the changes in communication. What solves the problem today will not necessarily provide the solution a year or two from now or 3 years from now. High-tech products are now on an order of change measured by 3 years. In 3 years, the new product we're using will be improved upon sufficiently to bring up the question of replacement. Each time we solve a problem, we increase our capacity to solve the next one, as well as our attitude toward problems in general. Another anguished cry we hear coming from the mouths of the uninformed goes, "Hey, that's not easy." Or in the case of people even worse off, "Hey, that ain't easy. What's all this business about easy?" It's a factor of affluence, of course. The better off we become, the more we tend to slack off the lines. When people are pampered by a rich system such as ours, when everyone has the equivalent of about 200 servants working for him, to say nothing of the horsepower at his command, there's a tendency to do less and less, and what is done tends to be fairly easy. About those 200 servants, that's what the experts tell us our modern age provides us with in the way of running water, hot water, electricity, automatic this, automatic that, modern stoves, refrigerators, central heating, radio, television, power lawn mowers. The horses, of course, are under the hoods of our cars. All of it, when compared to what our forefathers had to do for themselves in the wilderness, amounts to having about 200 servants. But it's much better than even 200 servants could have provided. So we start with that. Before we do any serious thinking at all, we have all that working for us. All we need concern ourselves with is the question, where do we go from here? Or perhaps two questions. Where do I want to go, and how do I want to get there? So get the yellow pad, lined is best, and go to work with your rotisserie. You are at this moment the sum total of your thoughts to this point. How do you feel about that? Does it feel good? Does it fill you with a glow of satisfaction? Then you've been doing fine, and have only to continue the process. If you're not happy with yourself at this stage, perhaps it's time for a change. On that yellow pad, write down the things you want. Don't worry about the order or the things themselves. Just write them down as they come to you. Big things, little things, conditions, things like income or a certain sum you'd like to have working for you. Write down everything you want. This is your personal list, and no one else has to see it. After you've listed everything you want, and chances are the list will be shorter than you would have believed before tackling it, after you've got everything listed, number the items in the order of their importance to you, or because of the way in which you want to achieve them. Put them in the proper order on another sheet and toss the first sheet away. Now you might think, but isn't that rather selfish, writing down the things I want? What good will that do the rest of the human race? You will do more good for the rest of the human race enthusiastically going full bore after the things you want than in any other way, because the only way you can get the things you want is by providing service to others, and the more intense and enthusiastic you are about it, the better will be your service. It's the way the free market private enterprise American system works. You'll do best that which you most want to do in the pursuit of your personal goals. In so doing, you will provide the maximum service to those you need to help you. That's how it works at IBM, or with the man shining shoes in the basement barber shop at the Cornhusker Hotel in Lincoln, Nebraska. And that's a great hotel, incidentally. That's what's so hard to augur into the heads of the intellectuals who talk about a better distribution of income. There's certainly no secret about it. We do what we need to do to meet our serious needs and wants, and then we usually stop. From the hobo to the mailman to Mr. Lee Iacocca at the Chrysler Corporation, that's the way it works. So go buy the yellow legal pads, a few good pens, and find a quiet spot and go to work, unless you've already got all of this taken care of and you're sailing along on course. If that's the case, you already know about all of this and how wonderfully it works. It's sure a lot of fun when you know how. You see, we become what we think about.